a lot of us have learned to learn or learned to grow or learned to train towards something by doing the thing. You want to get better at algebra, you do a lot of algebra, or chess, you do a lot of chess, or basketball, you play a lot of basketball. But as we see from those things are like martial arts and the Karate Kid. He wants to do karate, but it's like wax on, wax off for weeks at a time. This is not karate. No, I want to learn to do karate, but it's not always doing the thing, doing the end goal over and over again that's going to get us to the end goal. The action part of it is only one piece of our movement toward the goal that we want to get to. Overwhelm, reaction mode, and just keeping up are the old way.
You need real, root-level strategies and practical steps to grow your business or ministry without exhaustion and burnout.
Hi there, we're Anna Saucier
And Megan Gephardt,
best friends and business consultants who help faith-filled women create sustainable growth through simple strategy with a people-first approach.
Here at Apostolic Fruit, we hope to offer you clarity, support, accompaniment, and healing,
one tiny step at a time.
Hello, everyone. This is Megan Gephardt and Anna Saucier, co-hosts of the Apostolic Fruit podcast and co-founders of Apostolic Fruit. We're going to open up a really important topic today on capacity. And what is this all about? Honoring your capacity in growing without burning out or without running yourself into the ground or running your people into the ground. So we're going to talk about this in several different episodes and why it's so important and just why this really is the cornerstone of how we need to think about work, how we need to think about business and ministry, and working towards the growth that you desire without overextending yourself or without sacrificing your well-being or your family or all those things that matter most to you in the process. So if you've ever felt like growing your business or your ministry means and requires sacrificing your sanity, or you've found yourself constantly pushing through exhaustion, or maybe even just feeling the sheer amount of stress that comes with all the things that you have to do to keep up, or you're pushing yourself really hard, feeling like I'm just plugging along, waiting for that time when I can finally rest and take a little bit of a breather, then this is for you. And this topic is something that we are often finding ourselves really working deeply with clients in, both in external ways, but also in the deeper internal work. And so we're going to open this up. We're going to talk about why this matters and what you can start to do practically to make these shifts. And today specifically, we're going to discuss a paradigm shift that we think is really important when it comes to understanding and honoring our capacity in business and ministry. So why does this matter? The world tells us that success requires grinding harder, doing more, and making it happen at all costs. We want to question not only is this sustainable, but also the deeper question of, is this really aligned with the way that God has designed us to work and lead and His intention for our work? And so when we think about our work, I think so many of our missions and our ministries, our businesses, we desire for them to be redemptive. We want them to be healing for the world, but we also want to think about approaching it in a way that allows us to heal in the process. And I think it's just a different way of looking at it and what we always want to invite our clients into and what we personally are walking through as well in this journey. So I know for me, a lot of my lived experience in the military and this culture that I was seeped in for so long has been mission first. We had this phrase, mission first, people always. But really what that means is like the mission always comes first and we're going to achieve the mission. And it's really hard to do that without sacrificing your people. And I think especially in ministry environment or in a nonprofit environment or any of these organizations where you're really doing this deeply from your heart and you see it as a form of service and there's an inherent sacrifice, I think that's expected of you. And so there's this dynamic sometimes where we get this warped or perverted view of why sacrifice is so essential and how it should be kind of the bedrock of what we do and how we approach it. But oftentimes what it leads to is this bulldozing over our own needs or our people's needs just to make it happen. And I think as leaders too, we often can take on a lot of ownership of everything. We feel maybe an external imposed expectation, but also sometimes internally imposed pressure to work the hardest, to work overtime, to just work extra so that we can protect our people even from some of the pain or the shit that rolls downhill or whatever it might be, right? I want to protect my team. And a lot of that can come from a really beautiful place. But at the end of the day, we can often feel that it comes at a really high cost for us personally. And so we want to ask this question of like, what if honoring your real capacity, your time, your energy, your well-being, and that of your people is actually the key to long-term, life-giving growth and sustainable strategic growth. So Anna, can you share?
Yes.
I want to turn over to you to share a personal story.
Yeah.
Now that opens us up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the two most common examples that I think entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders that we can all relate to the most in terms of this whole journey is either birthing or a marathon. Like, as a listener, which one do you relate to the most? I'm curious. And I've done both. And running comes into my life at very pivotal points, or has in my story. And I want to talk about, in particular, my experience with 3 different marathons and how that has really helped me to understand capacity better and the counter-logical paradigm shift that we want to talk about today. So my husband and I ran 2 marathons together. We went through 7 years of infertility, and this was something that we decided to, okay, well, if we're not going to have kids, let's spend our time doing something else. And we did a lot of travel, and then we decided to start running together. So we did 2 of them together. The first one, we trained focusing on as much mileage as possible because a marathon is 26.2 miles. And we did lots of training, lots of long runs on the weekends. And this was for the San Diego Marathon. And so we got up to 22 miles. And at that point, we were like, oh, okay, we know we can make it to 26, right? But when we got to doing the marathon and we were all excited, and I got to mile 6 and something happened to my knee. I twisted it or landed on it funny, and I paused and I said to my husband, Wayne, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can keep going. But I also knew internally that if I didn't, I might not ever try a marathon again. And so I hobbled to the next aid station, and they gave me some Tylenol because this is the strongest thing they were allowed to give me. And they wrapped it up as tightly as possible so that I could barely bend it at all. And I literally half ran, half limped the next 20 miles. We did stop a lot. We ate snacks. We drank a lot of water. We knew that the goal was simply to finish. It wasn't about having the fastest time or anything. And I think we were some of the last ones in. It took us more than 6 hours. The second marathon was in Rome, which had a whole different set of challenges. First of all, if you've ever been to Rome, you know there's cobblestones everywhere. And walking 26 miles would be challenging and exhausting, but imagine running 26 miles on those cobblestones. It was also very Italian. It started like 2 hours late, and there was hardly any water. There were hardly any bathrooms. So people were peeing on the side of the marathon route all over the place and grabbing water from people's houses and the side of the route and all of these things. So once again, we just made it through barely. The next day, we could hardly walk. We were limping up and down stairs and everything. But those last few miles in both of those marathons was like, I hope we can just make it. And that was my experience with both of those. And then the third one, I had been exposed to a different way of training. This is by Hal Higdon. And I thought, well, let me try to do this differently and see if there's a way to actually train in a way that I'm not just trying to make every step to the end to just finish. And I did. And the approach for this marathon training is not to get as close to 26.2 miles as possible. It's to build endurance. I only ran 4 out of 7 days a week, and they weren't super long runs. It was 1 long run a week. The others were shorter. 1 day a week, I would go down to the track at 5 a.m., the local high school, before anybody was there. It was just the maintenance guys in the dark, and just run 300s. And if you've ever done sprint work, I ran track in high school. If you've ever done those, the point of it is you rest longer than you sprint, these kind of interval training. You would do a 300 and then rest longer, and then another 300 and rest longer. And another day would do strength training. You're lifting weights, not as much as possible, but gradually building strength. And I only ever trained up to 16 miles, I believe, as I was training for that 26.2 marathon, which it does bring up the questions internally at the time of, well, I don't know if I could run 26.2 miles. I knew because I'd done in the past, but it was a different age and other things going on in life. So there was an element of trust in this training regimen that if I do these other things, these things aren't running. And what I want to do is running. And are these things really going to help me to finish the marathon? So there was a huge element of trust there, both in myself and in the method. But what happened was I'm getting tears in my eyes thinking of the experience because it felt so good to run that marathon. It felt incredibly different from the previous two. I remember with every marathon, I always make a custom playlist that I love to listen to music when I run. And I remember dance running. I'm flailing my arms around here. You can't see them because it's a podcast, but I just enjoyed myself so much. I went from 6-hour marathons of those first two to almost breaking 4 hours in that third marathon. And my husband was going to meet me to run the last 4 miles together. And he could barely keep up with me. I mean, from 22 to 26 miles, he's like, what is going on? I can barely keep up with you, but I just felt so good. And I enjoyed the whole experience. And at the last half mile, I honestly probably passed 200 people because there were, I think, 17,000 people running this marathon in Carlsbad, California. It just was such a freeing experience. I don't know how else to put it. And I knew that doing the training differently made all the difference because I was truly growing in endurance and I was truly growing in resilience. My body was able to be resilient in every tiny moment of the marathon. And this is part of the paradigm shift introduction with capacity. Capacity and resilience are not something where we've strengthened it by pushing the limits, but by building the strength and doing the practice that allows those limits to expand, not because we're pushing them, but because it naturally expands on its own. Well, not even on its own, but by the Lord's grace, right? When we're looking at this in terms of a personal growth thing, I have a couple of reflections on this in terms of how it relates to this paradigm shift. And one of the points that I like to take from an agile learning paradigm is that a lot of us have learned to learn or learned to grow or learned to train towards something by doing the thing. And you want to get better at algebra, you do a lot of algebra, or chess, you do a lot of chess, or basketball, you play a lot of basketball. But as we see from those things are like martial arts and the Karate Kid. He wants to do karate, but it's like wax on, wax off for weeks at a time. This is not karate. No, I want to learn to do karate, but it's not always doing the thing, doing the end goal over and over again that's going to get us to the end goal. The action part of it is only one piece of our movement toward the goal that we want to get to. I mentioned agile learning. One of the paradigms of agile learning is that growth is catalyzed through cycles of attention, action, reflection, and sharing. So action is only a piece of it. And we must have the intentionality of what is the action in the first place, or the different actions. It is the running, but it's also the rest day. It's the strength training, the small sprints, and the rest in between those sprints. And then going back and reflecting on that action. Did it actually work? Is it moving me toward the goal? What do you think, Lord? Right? And then sharing with other humans our human lived experience. In this way, I really want to question a lot of the advice that we see in business circles and in growth circles that action is the thing. We hear clarity follows action. We say take action or do massive action. Let me just ask you, is that working for you? This is the real question. And if you reflect back in your previous experiences, just like me looking at, okay, well, those first 2 marathons, is that the experience I want to have in a marathon? Is this the experience that you want to have in the business? Is that way of pursuing the goal working for you? Because if it is, that's great. But if it's not, then I want to invite and encourage you to look at this differently and to question whether it's not as counterlogical as it may seem. And if there's a different way of looking at it, and really if you're open to that.
Well, that was awesome, Anna. I have a couple notes that I want to hit on here that I really resonated with. And I think a lot of people would resonate with just based on when we've had lots of conversations and work with clients in these capacities. But one thing that you said is, I hope that we can just make it. The goal is just to finish. And how many times in our business is like the lived experience, I hope I can get the numbers that I want to out of this launch. I hope I can keep the business even open and running. We just need to make it to the finish line to plan this conference or to plan this event or whatever it is to get to that result. And that is a painful space to be in.
I think it also is, as women, working against our true nature and the feminine genius, which is the journey is more meaningful to us naturally. And when we try to push ourselves to be focused on the goal or the end thing, that's not wrong. But it is not working fully within our nature and the way that God created us.
Yeah, and it ties back again to that do whatever it takes mentality that I think so many of us are just ingrained with based on society, competitive environments, academic culture, where we force ourselves to just work as hard as possible to get as much results as possible. Another thing that stands out to me, Anna, you made the comparison of these other ways of training, interval training, more sprints, more rest, stuff that doesn't look like running as many miles as possible. How are these other things going to work? They're not running like I will be doing in the marathon. Like, why is this going to work? I resonate a lot with this in the last 2 years even of just working with you in business in a very different way than I had as I was first starting my business about 5-6 years ago. It's like, okay, is taking a nap, is going out on the trail, is going to church to pray and taking all this space for adoration versus more time doing more work. How is that going to benefit my business? How is that going to ultimately allow me to receive more clients, more income, be able to support my family more, get me closer to that ultimate goal? But what I've really learned in taking that courageous action, like making that choice, the really hard choice often in the moment to rest instead of working more and instead of bypassing my needs in that moment, like tuning into those needs and honoring them, the Lord rewards that. And it's an act of trust and faith. And it's also surrendering the self-reliance in the moment that we can so often just get continually pulled back into of like, I have to do this from my own strength. But the Lord doesn't want you to do it from your own strength. And so where are we not tapping into the grace that He wants to give us?
Yeah, I think it's really, really, really important that you point out the heart of it, because we are fighting against so many messages and training and the whole way of being that you've been in the past. And you're going to have a lot that comes up with it. It's going to be a really hard work to make that shift. This is the reason we talk about the paradigm shift and make different examples like this, is because you can't start taking action first to say, I'm just going to be a different way now. We have to begin mulling it over and wondering about it and seeing the different connections, just like recognizing that action is only a piece of this growth and the way of doing things differently. I mean, we have to sleep like a third of our lives, right? God made us that way. And that's integration time. That's doing nothing. That's inaction, essentially, in the way that we see it. It's really important to just begin looking at these different areas to say, what is my natural way? I've seen leaders of organizations just say, oh, it's my nature to keep going and do all kinds of things and keep things moving and always be going. I'm going to say it. There's a pridefulness in that. And I want to challenge you to question that and to recognize that maybe this isn't your natural way, although it is the way that you have adopted and been shown and been exemplified to do, possibly for decades. And that's completely understandable that that has become your way of operating. And it's also time to question it, because it is not how we were created and we were designed. And this is what we want to invite you to look at differently.
Yeah, I really relate to that. And I think for so many years, especially, it wasn't safe for me to slow down. So I was operating just purely out of that state of adrenaline. But you do hit a point where you're in fatigue or you're in constant burnout and you're not even realizing it. And you're also not necessarily recognizing the cost, or you just may not even know, like, where do I even start to do this differently? So let's talk about some of those specifics of what happens when we ignore capacity. What are the dangers of this overextension? And again, talking practically in business. So pushing through may feel like the answer in the moment. Again, that's the hard part about this. It can be counter-logical. And so we may experience that short-term gain. We may see the result that you probably have seen it, which is why it's a cycle that you can get so stuck in, because you get rewarded for it. And you may even have other people externally rewarding you and validating you for your hard work and pushing through and just, oh my gosh, look at all that you can do. And like, you're doing it all and you're superwoman and all these things. And yet maybe your internal experiences, you feel some of that misalignment, or you just feel the exhaustion, you feel the weight of it. And so again, overworking, it may produce those results temporarily, but at what expense? And there's the hidden tolls of, we have decision fatigue, we have more stress, we have more strained relationships. We may feel like we're constantly behind, or you may start to feel even resentment towards the work or towards your team, or even if you love your mission, you love your team, you may feel there is this kind of almost shameful, even embarrassing misalignment between how you feel and how you're treating yourself behind the scenes versus what your mission is externally standing for. And we see this so many times, and we've personally experienced this too, and we're always working to increase the alignment here because this is a painful space of awareness. So if you're seeing work is kind of spilling into every area of your life, that again is one of those signs. If you're struggling to have clarity on what's actually most important because everything feels constantly urgent and you're putting out fires, that's another sign of this. The tendency here is when we're in these states of going, moving a million miles an hour, we are also leaving God out of the process most of the time. We can't hear his voice when we don't allow ourselves to be still. That's the reality. We also can't even process our deeper emotions when we don't allow ourselves to be still. So there's probably so much beneath the surface that hasn't even been allowed to come forth that is kind of being held back. We can't ultimately serve well or lead well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to reinforce that too, that sometimes you're not actually feeling the strain of the pushing through yet. Like, you may not be feeling the stress or the internal stuff. You may not recognize an internal alignment. Sometimes we don't see those things until you have, like Megan said, this space to think about it and to feel it more deeply. But when you're in the cycle of go, it actually may feel good internally. It feels really good because you're getting that adrenaline feedback. You're getting that internal hormonal response of operating in that way. In this case, it's really important, if you want to start examining this, to, like Megan said, challenge yourself to that quiet space to see if there's anything else going on below the surface. But you can also externally observe and say, what is happening around me? I think sometimes we don't even recognize that we are churning through people. What's going on here? What are my relationships look like? What does the external environment look like that I may have a part to play in? So I want to make this distinction that you don't always start to feel the exhaustion or decision fatigue or stress first. But if you can recognize how your way of operating is affecting other people in those relationships and the people that you're leading, this is just another way of looking at it.
Yeah, and that's where we can give the example. We've seen two different organizations even recently that I think can be contrasted in this sense. We have one experience where one of our clients was reflecting this new organization she's going to be working with. The founder's expectations, she literally said, are so humane and reasonable and reflective of and honoring of my capacity. And this leader has been able to retain excellent people over time, precisely because they're responsive and attentive and really committed to taking care of people and not placing heavy burdens on them that they can't meet. And isn't it incredible what they've accomplished just through working moms, none of them who are giving more than 15 hours a week. And I feel so deeply supported and have this really deep underlying trust in them as a leader. And I think we all want to embody that. We want our people to feel that, right? We want them to feel that they're being served by working within and for this organization. They're just being so well taken care of. And I know that was something as Anna and I began working together and collaborating together. Every single day, I kept telling Anna, I feel so deeply honored to be working with you. And I feel so deeply honored in just the way that I'm taken care of as a human being. And there's nothing that can compare to that. So it's just really, really beautiful. And then you can contrast that with another organization that we've seen where doing really great work, but losing a lot of people with a lot of turnover, a beautiful life-changing mission, and incredible values. They are really changing the culture externally, but have lost nearly every single leader who has joined in the last 3 or so years. Most people don't stay for more than a year. Internally, there's a lot of dysfunction, a lot of chaos. Everyone is being run into the ground behind the scenes, and it's just unsustainable. And at some point, even if people are really deeply committed to that mission, they're not willing to stay because it becomes intolerable to a certain point for themselves and for their families. And none of that is intentional. And it's so heartbreaking to witness and to see how it's hurting the people within it, right? So this is where we want to also bring an important point of awareness is that growth, even if you were to grow and get more of the results externally you're looking for, whether it's more clients, more income, more of that strategic growth, it's not going to eliminate the problems that you have. It will magnify what you're experiencing foundationally, even just where you are right now. I think there's this temptation to think that our problems are all going to be solved if we bring in more income, like we finally get some breathing room, right? But without the strong foundation in the first place of some structure, some strategies, the sustainable rhythms really that honor the people within it, including you as the leader or the founder or the business owner, without that commitment of honoring capacity, scaling will only make things heavier. It will introduce more complexity. It will get harder and harder to hold. And it will become even more moving pieces, more parts, more people to keep track of and keep up with. And so this is it's kind of the painful awareness point that we want to bring, right? Is that the growth doesn't always solve the problems. It will add additional things to think about. And so this foundation is so important, and it's worth taking the time and energy to look at and to be discerning in and to tend to. That's why we're always talking about tending to this foundation, because that's the fertile soil.
Fertile soil. Thank you, Megs. Yes. This discussion around capacity truly is foundational, and it is the stuff of the fertile soil, because you cannot make everything happen. If we are operating in God's work and recognizing that the work that you are doing has come from Him and is just moving through your heart so that you can then give it back to your people and to the world, then we must look at and understand capacity, because the irony of this concept of capacity is that it means both to give and to receive. If you look it up online, the first definition is the maximum amount that something can contain. And the second definition is the amount that something can produce or give. So it means both to give and receive. So if you're hitting capacity in the doing, and in all that you're trying to fill up in your life and your work, you will not have capacity to receive. And that is what we're designed for. It's not to do and do and do. It is to receive. It's to receive from the Lord. It's to receive His grace and mercy and wisdom and His plan and His will to co-create with him, this kingdom that we're all working toward. It is a humbling place to shift this paradigm, to do this differently. It's hard to choose it. It requires a lot of humility to say, okay, me operating on my own capacity and the pushing through and these other examples that we've shared, to stop and to re-examine the way that we're doing it requires a tremendous amount of humility. But this is a really important part of beginning to do it differently. And that it must be your choice to do it differently if you're in a place of awareness of this way that I've been doing it is not working. And I want to reiterate the choice and the decision point in that. And we have a choice and a decision at every step of this work to continually re-examine, just like I mentioned in the learning process, that growth is catalyzed through intention, action, reflection, and sharing, that we're always re-examining, what am I doing? What kind of effect is it having? Am I operating within the paradigm that I want to be operating within? And just recognizing that there's nuance to this understanding of pursuing the goal. It's not just, here's the thing that I want to get to, and so I'm going to just go all out and do as much of that as possible. God didn't make us that way. There's so much nuance to our wholeness and to the way that we live out our calling in the world with different energies and different focal points and different emotional bandwidth at different times, and all of the stuff that's going on both in our business and in personal lives and in the world, and the different gifts and strengths that you have as an individual, how you uniquely process information and input and demands and decisions, and what are your needs. We cannot be aware of all of that nuance and be in communication about that with the Lord if we're just do the thing, do the thing, do the thing. Okay? So as humbling as it is to try to embrace this different way of being, I want to remind you that the action is only a part of it. The slowing down and the examining and the listening is key. And recognizing that you're going to be fighting against logic. This way of being does require some action, for sure. It does require some running, right? But it also requires some strength training and tiny sprints and rest time. The journey doesn't look like the destination. The way of the cross looks nothing like the victory. The agony and the suffering and the Via Dolorosa is not the same as the resurrection. They look nothing alike. So the invitation is to expand your awareness and practice awareness and communication with yourself and with others about capacity, and starting to give yourself permission to play in this differently. Because this is one of the most important ways that we can be fully human, recognize our capacity and our limits, because that's where the Lord can meet us in His strength. That's where we can be fully who we are in our humility and littleness with the Lord, not always operating in our own limits of our own capacity. But what if our Lord has already paid that price for you, and you don't have to do it by your own strength? And we can shift this paradigm to do it differently, and you can operate in the receptivity of God's work and in His strength. And it doesn't have to be quite so hard.
We hope you loved today's episode. If so, would you take a moment to share it with a friend?
If you haven't already, come connect with us human to human at apostolicfruit.com/connect. When you're ready, we'd love to support you more deeply.
May the Lord bless you and keep you, make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you,
and turn His face toward you and give you peace.